All right, welcome back to We the People on Godspeed Ministries, and we welcome our holdouts from St. Petersburg, Florida, from when I lived there 3 years ago, and some of our folks over in Muncie, Indiana region, as well as most of our subscribers in Parkersburg, West Virginia, based on our local crimes, helping to fight for the things that you guys deem important, for safety and justice and things like that. Today, our topic is going to be about transgendered shooters, and I talked about a month or so ago about the Wes Rowley, and he was the 20-year-old, I believe that was Minnesota or Montana, where he was transgendered and shooting, and it's now in our news. It's real time. This is a very real topic up for debate, and if you look at what's going on right now, President Trump is trying to make it to where transgendered people can't have access to or can't own weapons like guns. If you look at a lot of the recent shootings done by transgendered people, a lot of the times they are getting weapons from family members or outside resources. And I think that a lot of people are confused. They think that it's only been 2 transgendered shooters lately, Wes Rowley, and then this latest one at the Catholic school in Minnesota, which was a couple weeks ago. But no, sir, it's been a lot more than 2. We're talking about many shooters who have been transgendered in the last 5 years or so. If you hearken back, I did a video on the Uvalde, Texas shooter, and that was about 2 years ago, where the kid went into, he's very young, he's probably about 20, and he went into an elementary school that was propped open by one of the staff members there in the back door, which gave him access to killing people there. And when you see that it was propped open, you're starting to open your eyes. You're starting to say, wait a minute, law enforcement had a delayed response. They let this kid shoot. A lot of these events, it's orchestrated. It's like it's planned out in advance on different levels. I mean, you look at Matthew Thomas Crooks, who was the alleged President Trump shooter last year in Butler, Pennsylvania. And again, I talked about how Butler keeps coming up a lot of times in these weird things of our nation's history. And now it comes to find out that this is actually, it was a put on. I agree with some of the people that are saying that Trump's ear should still have a scar on it. A lot of these things, it just doesn't sit right. But Matthew Thomas Crooks actually was going through a period where he was transgendered. People don't know this, but his hair was long and he had a hippie choker on. There was a picture of that had surfaced. He wasn't like far into the process. You got to understand people who are going through this transition stuff, who are transgender. It's when these shooting events happen, they don't seem to be very far along in the process. And I talked about it in the Wes Rowley case last month when that one happened, and somebody tried to blast me and said, oh, the focus isn't transgenderism. It's disgusting why you're bringing that into it. Well, it turns out I was right, and these people who are leaving these few and far between comments, that they're not right. I don't know if I'm being attacked or what, but it seems like I'm often right on these things. They're not far along in the transition process to being transgender, but I said then, and I'm saying it now, it seems like it's the psychotropic drugs and also MK Ultra brainwashing that's going on. And you say, how is that happening? Well, it appears that it's the counselors or the therapists. I call it therapists. The media will call it counselors. If you look at the case of the Uvalde, Texas shooter, he was being administered to. He was seeing a counselor for many months before this happened. So that's where I believe that they are receiving the counsel to go out and shoot people. And you ask, where are they getting the guns? And like I said, it's coming from family members oftentimes. Now, President Trump wants to introduce legislation that they can't receive weapons. Well, transgender people are protected under the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Under the Bill of Rights, it says that they are allowed to have guns because they were born here and they are natural citizens. But then you start to ask the question, are they mentally fit to do it? And personally, I would say that they're not. I think they're going under a mental disease. But it doesn't mean that they're worse than any other person out there. They are a person with feelings. They have a soul. They do matter. But they're going through you know, a mental crisis, if you will. At least that's the way I see it. And you talk about transitioning, and when they undergo the transition therapy, they're receiving drugs that, if they're doing it as prescribed, it's what a teenager would be going through. So on that mentality, I would say, well, no, you wouldn't give a teenager a gun. So if they're going through chemicals that a teenager would be going through, as far as like estrogen or testosterone and stuff like that, it's going to impact the way your brain functions. So I understand the mentality of not wanting them to have guns, but the problem is, when the founders of the Constitution developed that framework, it said that everybody is entitled to bear arms. You know, it didn't take into account certain things like that. But here's my stance. I am pro gun ownership. I do think that you shouldn't take it out of their hands. And the reason I'm saying that is because once you start taking guns out of select people's hands, then you start going down a slippery slope, and then it's going to be, well, then these people can't have it, and these people can't have guns, and then it's going to be the rest of us. So that's not what us conservatives want. We want people to own guns, but this whole thing is a big deal, because we're seeing multiple times. I mean, it's not just 2 transgendered shooters. If you harken back, it's not just Uvalde, Texas in the last 2.5 years. Look at the Nashville shooter that happened last year, where it was a female who was transitioning to be a man, and she shot up that, I believe it was a school in Nashville, Tennessee. There were actually a couple of them in Nashville two years ago or last year. There's a lot of them. I talked about Matthew Thomas Crooks possibly going through transition at the end there last year, and his parents were counselors licensed by the state of Pennsylvania, the both of them, which is odd in itself. You know, why is somebody who's going to be a would-be Trump assassin have access to his dad's AR-15, and both of those parents are counselors? So this is what I'm talking about. It's through the counselors and the therapists, and somehow they are administering either psychotropic drugs or MK Ultra brain control. You guys think it's just a conspiracy theory, but these things are happening real time right now, and nobody's really asking the question of why this is happening. Why, if transgendered people constitute 2% of our total population, why are so many of them becoming mass shooters? And that's the real question of this video. And why are we not asking the questions? Why is it happening? You know, they want us to think that, yeah, they're mentally diseased, which I would agree with, but if you start taking guns out of people's hands, and it starts real small like this, 2% of the population, then you're going to go to other groups, and then it's going to be everybody. And then that's when your military, your federal government can come in and say, hey, wait a minute, you're in violation of this law. You're not allowed to own a gun. And then it's Nazi Germany all over again. Now, not all transgendered people are mass shooters. I mean, you can make the argument that not all white supremacists are mass shooters either, which that would be true. But you see a lot of hate coming from these groups. So you see it on message boards from the people who support transgenderism, whether they be trans themselves or people who just support it. You know, they have a real hatred toward Christians. Now, to be fair, on the flip side, Christians don't support transgenderism either. You know, as Christians, we're taught to love the person but hate the behavior. So these are all things to take into consideration, to think about on this topic. You know, this is a very, very hot topic in our news right now, and if we want it to stop, we're going to have to get a jump on the evil people who are pulling the strings behind the scenes, and largely the therapists and the counselors, whatever you want to call them, who are administering to these transgendered people and giving them drugs, because I've talked about drugs are a demon. They put a demon in you. You look at alcohol, I've talked about it several times. It derives its name from the Arabic demon al-Kul. And they call it fine spirits because you're under the influence. That's what they say when you're pulled over by a cop for alcohol, you're under the influence. So fine spirits, you're being taken over so finely that you don't realize it. Alcohol is just one example. I mean, all drugs are like that. And you can even extend that to prescription drugs. Western medicine is not the answer. Herbs are. Natural medicine is. You know, it's not in the world of vaccines and stuff like that. Bill Gates, he's one of the most heinous and evil people on the face of this earth. I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole for this video, but I'll do it on a later one. But that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I'll tell you this right now, it's not going to stop. Is what Trump doing unconstitutional? Technically, yes, it is. The Constitution does protect these people under the Second Amendment, but what is the answer? What do we do? How do we stop this? Like I said, you got to get a jump on the evil people behind the strings, and you have to stop them before they corrupt our youth and poison their brains into thinking that they need to do these things. So that's all I got to say on this video. Whether you agree, disagree, our end goal is to try to bring people together. Just because you might be conservative or liberal, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Are you doing good things? Are you helping people? Are you avoiding the bad things? Are you avoiding drugs? Are you avoiding stealing off people and hurting them? Avoid that stuff. We know a lot of people afflicted by drugs. I work with them, I see them, we live around them, we're neighbors to them. We want to help turn our communities around locally and throughout the nation. So thanks for tuning in to this video. Appreciate you guys, and until next time, as always, Godspeed.